Tonight we're hosting our Preparing for Your Industry interview. And this information that you're going to receive tonight and the advice that you're going to get really pertains to any and every possible industry you can go into, where our speakers certainly have their own backgrounds and experiences that they've been in. Really, I think that the principles that they're going to talk about and the advice they're going to give can apply to pretty much anything. So we're very happy to welcome you today, and this is sort of a preparation event before we have our career fairs next week. So I'm going to just ask each of our speakers to introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about your background, and then we'll go into the actual questions.
Heather, did you want to go? Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Dara. I work for Sunbelt Staffing in the Oldsmar location. My background is a little bit of retail. It's a little bit of customer service. Prior to this, I came from a background check company, and now I'm in recruiting. So anybody can have any path that leads you to recruiting.
Thank you.
And I'm Heather Leon. I'm the Senior HR Manager for Training and Development at the Pinellas County Tax Collector's Office. So one of many county departments in Pinellas County. I have been a public servant my entire career. I started as an AmeriCorps volunteer. I worked for the state for 15 years, and I've been here for nearly 7 years. I came up through recruiting actually as I moved up in my previous career into supervision and management. I had to start recruiting and interviewing folks. And then that landed me in HR. And so it's one of my major responsibilities now.
Excellent. Okay. So we will go directly into the questions, and really these aren't, predetermined questions, or there's no right or wrong answer, but we just have some prompts as far as the interview process is concerned. And if at any point you have questions either during the session or after, please feel free to use the raise hand feature, and we will get to those. So I will start off with just kind of the order of the whole interview process and sort of the life cycle. So would love for you to each comment on before the interview happens, before the students are invited to interviews. If you could talk a little bit about the preparation and research process, would love to hear your thoughts.
So what I always recommend is that when you're applying for a place, please, please, please read through the job description. One of the things that I run into a lot is people just see whatever title has been posted, and then they find out that it doesn't really align with their goals. So just take the extra second. I know that easy apply button is there on LinkedIn and it's okay to use. Just make sure that you read through the job description first before you submit anything.
And I would add to that to maybe do a little research on the company. Very quick at first before you're ready to interview, but look at where it is. Make sure you're familiar with if they're saying it's remote, hybrid, in person. What feeling do you get from it? Look on Glassdoor, use your resources. You can start knowing pretty early on if it's a place, an industry, and a job based on the description that you're interested from the get-go.
Great, thank you. And a lot of times our students will ask the question of, should they use a sort of overall resume for each job? Should they tailor it to the job description? What would you say on that piece?
Tailor, tailor, tailor.
I'm going to agree. The only time I wouldn't tailor is if you just don't have a whole lot of job experience. Then it's okay to have, the time that you worked at Starbucks and the time that you worked at Panera and the time you worked at the bookstore, because if you don't have that longevity of work history, it's okay to put it all.
At the same time, there are going to be sections you're kind of always going to modify. So if the job description, to Dara's point, says you need a certain set of skills or they're looking for certain qualities, and you have that on a list somewhere, or there's a certification you've received, highlight that, bump that to the top. Make sure your words, if you have an objective or you do your cover letter, make sure your words are mirroring what's in that job description. So even if you are needing to put that work experience or somewhat unrelated work experience, make sure that the experience you have, that verbiage is matching what they say. And that can be true even in the job you may think is not relevant. There's a very good chance that you did some things in that job that relate to something they're asking for. Make sure your language matches what they're talking about.
Excellent. Okay, so now the student has received an invitation to interview. What are some things that you would say are key tactics or even just reminders that you would give to students once they get into the interview process?
I think going back to what Heather said, right? Do your research, be prepared to talk about the company. If they've connected with you, they want to talk to you. So please also have confidence. Your resume is what got you that either first discovery call, that first phone screen, maybe that first in-person interview. So just have confidence. Come prepared to talk about yourself, but again, having done research on the company you've applied for.
And I would say this is also from personal experience interviewing, um, preparation. So everything from what are you going to wear to your interview to what materials are you bringing with you? I always recommend folks bring pen and paper at minimum. Personally, I actually bring a portfolio. I make sure I have copies of my resume. If you've had that phone screen, that was the time to ask what type of interview it's going to be. Is it going to be a panel interview? If so, make sure you have enough copies of your resume for everyone who's going to be there. So preparing that portfolio, you may have copies of certificates, awards. If you've gone onto the website and you've noticed something really interesting, something about their values, strategic plan, feel free to print that out. You may end up referring to that, as well as any questions you are going to ask, which we'll get to later at the end of your interview. Make sure those are written down so you're ready to ask them when that time comes up.
And can you talk a little bit about what the candidate should be thinking about for themselves when they're going through the interview process? The notion of it being kind of a two-way interview. What should the candidate keep in mind as well on their end?
Exactly that. It is a two-way interview, even though it does not feel like it's sitting on one side of the table versus the other. As much as it is for the employer to get to know you, it's for you to get to know them. So, I mean, Heather said it best, come prepared with questions. Let's do research, be prepared to talk about it. But also, you want to get to know this leader as well. There's a really, really good chance that the person who's interviewing you will be direct management above you one way or the other, whether that's a supervisor, a team lead, your manager, a director. They're very likely going to be above you. So get to know them, because if you do not connect with them, if you don't find anything in common with them, it might not be the best fit for both parties, but you're not going to know unless you interview them a little bit too. But please ask professional questions. It's not best when you ask them, oh, well, tell me about benefits and tell me about pay. That should have been already discussed before you came in. The questions you usually should be asking them are expectations about the role. You can always share what you already feel that you've learned, maybe from that discovery call with somebody else or from the job description, but talk about the opportunity that's in front of you too.
And I think I'm going to go a little further. Your interview starts as soon as you're on property, assuming that it's in person. If it is a virtual interview, the minute you click into that call, from start to finish, that's your interview. But there may even be other touch points. For example, if you're scheduling through someone's assistant, that's part of the interview. I know one thing we do here is we do a work sample, and folks will finish their interview, walk into the work sample, and they kind of think the interview is over. It's actually my staff that are doing the work sample, and they're noticing, is this person swearing at their computer screen? Are they acting flustered? Are they rude? because they're going to be paying attention. At the same time, this is your chance to see if this is a good cultural fit for you. If their website said they're a collaborative company and they have pictures of folks in these interactive situations, and you walk in and you don't hear a peep and you're not seeing that it's necessarily matching, that should be a red flag for you. Certainly, just as whoever you see at the front desk when you walk in, be professional from the moment you start. At the same time, make note of how they treat you. Make note of how they talk to you. If you are getting a bad feeling, pay attention to that. That's telling you something. If you're feeling that what you read or heard in the discovery call and what you're experiencing do not align, make note of that. That's telling you something about maybe this isn't what you thought it was going to be. So pay attention to those things.
Great advice, thank you. So now to the actual questions. What are some typical questions that students can expect from an interview? And obviously it'll vary by industry or if they need some specific technical skills, but overall, what kinds of questions should they expect and advice for how to answer the question in a detailed way, but without being too long-winded.
Usually in most interviews, there's going to be a form of what is your greatest strength and what is your greatest weakness. I will always recommend that when you are talking about your greatest weakness, don't think of it that way. Think about a time where maybe you were struggling and you persevered through it. Put that mindset into yourself instead of, oh no, I have to find something negative about myself. Usually in those moments, different employers are looking for how you're coachable and how you handle different sticky situations in a professional manner.
I think another question that folks can tend to get a little hung up on is tell us about a time you got tough feedback, or tell us about a time you made a mistake, or tell us about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. So all of those tell us about a time questions or give us an example are what we call behavior-based questions. And that's what a lot of employers use. And it's basically the idea is, how do your past actions indicate how you're going to act for our company whenever the going gets tough? First, I would encourage you to be honest. Do not pick the most embarrassing, horrible thing you ever did, and make sure it stays professional. At the same time, they're kind of wanting to hear a story, a succinct story. You don't need to go into all of the details on how your particular point of sale system worked and what the issue was. Just state it very clearly. We got a new system using this. This is what happened. Own your mistake and then talk about how you resolved it. So think of it as your hero's journey. You have a problem. This is what you've overcame and you won the day. I would also encourage you to think about ways that you can highlight how you've been effective on a team, particularly if it's going to be a team you're working on. They want to make sure that you're not a psychopath or a narcissist. But make sure you do, when you are the hero of the story, make sure you're highlighting your part and then also giving credit where credit is due. If they're asking about a time you had a conflict with a coworker, they do not want to hear, oh, this girl and I just didn't get along. They want to know how were you proactive in solving the problem and making the workplace better? So really think about what they're asking. The other piece is make sure you're answering everything asked. Sometimes there are two parts. Do not be afraid to write down what both parts are. It's okay to take a breath after they ask the question. I think a lot of folks feel like they need to launch right in. That 2-second breath that you take to prepare your thoughts, that does not seem like a long time to anyone else. It just feels like a long time for you. So take that pause. If you've prepared ahead of time for some questions, you may realize that it's relevant to one of the things that you prepared for yourself. So take that breath, be quick in your response in terms of keeping it short, but make sure it has that beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah, and I would just add to that too. I think a lot of students will be interviewing for internships or full-time positions that are entry level. So a lot of times your examples may be from prior internships or jobs that you've had, throughout your early years in college or high school, or sometimes the example is from something in your personal life. Don't be afraid to use those examples because they're just as valid. Whatever you think displays your capability in that particular question, use that. So if it's about teamwork and you played a sport in high
Mhm.
school and you were the captain, that's just as significant as, experience in a workplace, which again, you might not have yet because you're interviewing for an entry level position, for those of you who are. So I would just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And if you've been on any kind of committees or boards, or if you're in a student group, you probably have a lot more experience than you realize. So feel free to use any of those.
for sure. Um, so just switching gears for a moment, you obviously both have had experience interviewing a lot of candidates. What would you say are some of your personal interview pet peeves?
Oh, Heather's looking like she's ready to go. Go for it.
So my biggest one is, I know for us, we have a lot of information about us on our website. And when you get to the end of that interview and they say, do you have any questions for us? If that question is something that's on the first page of the web page, I have to admit, I'm a little annoyed, because that indicates to me that you didn't even do a basic amount of research for the job. And so again, I think you're looking for a place where you're going to be able to fit in and grow, but your company is also, the potential company is also looking to see someone who wants to fit in and grow and wants to be part of the team. If it's right there on in the web page, that should already be something that you know. So that's a big one for me.
I think that my biggest is not only being early, being on time is always best. It definitely irks me personally when I've given somebody, because for at least us, I give you a map. I even give you like a photo of where to park and everything. And I will still get text messages and calls from candidates going, I can't get into the building. Did you read my email? Because it is truly like step by step. Like if you park here and you walk here, you'll get upstairs. I think my other biggest pet peeve would have to be coming unprepared in a lot of these wrap up calls. Again, whether it's a phone interview or the first interview, or if you're speaking to me or Heather, I know I personally try to prepare my candidates as best as possible. I put it in the email of here's where you're going, date, time, come dressed professional, resume, notebook, pen, all of those things. When you don't do those things, that tells me that not only was our conversation not enough because we talked about it, but you didn't even take the courtesy to read an email from me. It gives me red flags to suggest that leaders move forward with you then too. Because if you can't read something from me and we aren't even working together yet, I have to unfortunately assume that you're not going to take the role with due diligence, and that you're not going to regularly respond to things that you feel are not as important.
I think the other thing I would add, it's not a pet peeve, but it always makes me a little sad for the candidate, is there are often a few sort of gimme questions, I will say. For example, one I've used is there anything you wish we would have asked you today? So maybe you had phenomenally prepped for a specific type of question and we didn't ask it. And so that is basically kind of free extra points and a little bit of a how well did you prepare? And the other is, do you have any questions for us? So again, that's an opportunity for you to show really your interest in the position, in the organization that you're applying for. And if you've come up with well thought out questions, it is such a it's something people really remember. as part of it, will help you stand out. So you have these opportunities to stand out above the crowd, and it's sort of being handed to you. And if you're not taking them, it's just such a missed opportunity, especially if it's something you really want.
Great. And then we touched on this before, but any points that you would make or advice regarding in-person interviews versus virtual interviews? We see a lot of companies doing a combination or all virtual, all in person now that we're a few years past the height of COVID. Any advice you would give either way?
I think if you're having virtual, keep in mind a couple things, right? Like Heather and I are dressed professionally, top up. We have either a professional background like Heather, or I did not have time for my logo today, so I blurred my background. On a virtual one, we don't want to hear background noise. We don't want to see dirty laundry. We don't want to see your cat rolling around. We don't want your roommate to walk in and go, oh, sorry, didn't realize. We don't want to see those things. As far as an in-person interview, again, coming dressed professionally. If you're not sure what the dress code is, if it was not discussed, ask. We are personally a business casual office. I still always tell all my candidates, come business professional for the interview. You need to be dressing the way you need to, not the job you want, the way you need to. The other thing that I would say is I know a lot of people do get nervous about eye contact being in person. The trick I always use, because I have a hard time with it too, go for the nose, either the tip of the nose or right in between. That is still giving me illusion that you are making eye contact with them when you're really not, and it might help to ease you a little bit more in that in-person interview.
I would just echo everything that Dara said. And test your audio and video before, please. If you're in your car, make sure your phone and you're on your phone, make sure it has enough charge. Those would all be things. It seems minor, but there's nothing like having a call drop because somebody's phone died to weed you out.
Yep. And one other thing I will say is that if it's virtual, please take that as seriously as if you were in person. So if you do have to take it in your car, I understand, but you should not be driving. You should not have any additional distractions. This should be as if we were in person. And last time I checked, you're not driving in the middle of my conference room in my office. So please, same mindset. If you wouldn't do it in person, don't do it during a virtual.
Yeah, and then the one thing I would add to that, just with virtual interviews and the way that the whole setup is, sometimes when you're listening to someone speak, you're watching the screen, you're not necessarily looking at your camera. So keep that balance in mind of when you're listening to a question versus when you're talking to the audience or the one interviewer. It's always helpful to look in the camera when you are answering, even though it might seem a little bit awkward because in reality, you're not really looking at the person, but that shows the interviewer that you are making contact because that you're making eye contact because you're looking directly at the camera. So that's just a little nuance I would throw in there to make sure you're sort of doing a little bit of combination of both. And then my final question is really just follow up after the interview. What are your thoughts on the best way to follow up with the interviewer, with an interview panel, recruiter, whatever the case might be?
It's always okay to ask during your interview, what would the next steps be? And even if it's something where they cannot give an answer right then and there, they might tell you, Dara is going to be the next to connect with you about this. And that's okay. What you can always do is you can always either ask for your interviewer's email if they have not already given it to you, or your original person like me, you probably already have my email. You are welcome to send me a notice letting me know that you enjoyed your time. I know I like to see that because then I can share that with my leaders. If they had any hesitation about you being potentially excited and really interested, I think we all understand nerves during an interview. So writing that thank you note and expressing your interest makes a world of difference in the post-interview that follow-up with us. Anything different you do, Heather?
No, I mean, I'm definitely a big fan of the thank you notes. Honestly, I was kind of going in my brain a little more of the what not to do. Of sort of, there are kind of times and places, and each organization's a little different. So you're going to have to use your best judgment about when to ask certain questions. I know when Dara and I were talking earlier a few days ago with Christy, we were talking about our recruiters are going to have that conversation. I think, Dara, you mentioned that phone screen and preparing for that in-person interview. A lot of times we're putting that salary information up front. During that interview or in that follow-up, thank you period, that is not the time to negotiate salary. Certain questions that your recruiter had with you, they really care, what we call the candidate experience. The person who's doing the recruiting, they really care about your experience, and they're kind of your go-to person. So kind of at the end of that interview or right after that interview, replying with, when do we talk salary? Or could you tell me about the benefits? That probably should have gone through your recruiter, or that's at a different phase when they're getting ready to offer. But during that interview phase, that's not the time. So my brain was sort of in a more what not to do answer to the question as opposed to what to do.
It's funny you mentioned
equally
that,
important.
Heather.
Absolutely. Anything else that either of you would add that we didn't already address?
I don't think so. I think that we've talked about overall just being professional, coming prepared, having that confidence. Different lifestyle or life cycles of the interview may differ. Do not be afraid to ask, what does the interview process look like? But again, that's not a question that you should have during your in-person interview. That is a question that you need to ask during your discovery call. 99% of the time, I don't mind telling you that, hey, it starts with me, then I get you into a first, then we do a reference check, then our second, because that's how the process goes, at least for my group. We don't mind telling you that, and you should want to know. You should want to know what to expect in that time frame, rather, right? Because you should also have an understanding of how serious is this company about me. So that's not a bad question to ask, but you should ask that if you are curious. I think that's the only thing that I didn't mention earlier.
Sure. Anything for you, Heather?
No, I was going to say, do we have any questions?
Yeah. This is the time we would take questions from the audience. Does anyone have any? If you don't want to speak, or if for some reason you can't, you can always put it in the chat as well. Maybe just give it a minute and see if there are any questions. I know that you were both very thorough, so thank you for that. All right. Well, if there are no questions, I really appreciate Heather and Dara, you both joining the session and being able to share with students your perspectives. I think it's super valuable. This session has been recorded, so students can always watch after the fact. If there are other questions, they can be funneled through me or someone on the team. But yeah, thank you again for presenting, and thank you for joining. And hopefully this was valuable to you as you enter the interview process, especially as we lead up to the career fairs. So thanks everyone again, and best of luck.
Good luck. Go Bulls.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.